Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Facebook live stream and Instagram live stream. Welcome, happy Thursday. I'm very excited to be here today because today is all about storytelling. Um, Today, I will be sharing my tips and my experiences with travel therapy. For those of you that do not know me, I am Dr. Jody Miller. I am the owner of Clinical Connections Mentoring. So if you're watching now in the Facebook group, the Clinical Connections Mentoring Facebook group, hello. If you're watching on Instagram Live, hello. Thank you for coming. I have been a physical therapist for 15 years. Now I work in the Tampa area. I have my own cash-based practice where I work mostly with gymnasts and cheerleaders. But in my 15 years, I've worked in just about every setting that you can think of. Um, I have worked in acute care. I've done oncology. I've done pediatrics. You will hear about that today. I have done home health. I have done a lot of outpatient in different types of settings. I've done a lot of skilled nursing in different settings. I have been a rehab director of a skilled nursing facility. I think that's kind of about it. And I'm an adjunct professor at a local PT school. I've done a lot of lab assisting. And like I said, now I own my cash-based practice and I'm the owner of Clinical Connections Mentoring. So that is me in a nutshell. If you are watching, what I'd like to do now, if you're watching live, give me a wave, tell me where you're watching from. If you are watching on Facebook, go ahead and drop your name, where you're from. I like to know who I'm talking to. If you are watching the recording or the replay, just drop replay in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. If you have any questions throughout today's live, feel free to drop them. If you're watching the recording, go ahead and drop the questions as well in the comment section, and I will definitely make sure to answer you. So let's get started. Like I said, today is all about storytelling for me. So I get a lot of questions. Everybody kind of knows how things are in the rehab world right now. A lot of people are wanting to look into travel therapy. They think maybe this is the next best thing to try. We all know that the pay for travel therapy is much higher. So a lot of people are starting to kind of look into it and they're having a lot of questions. Probably for the same reasons that I did. I first heard, my husband and I, we met in PT school. We first heard about travel therapy in our first year PT school. And right away, we were kind of hooked. We were like, yep, we definitely want to make sure we do this at some point in our career. We actually did work at a hospital for 3 years before we traveled. We wanted to get some experience before we went right into travel. Not saying that you have to. There are plenty of people who jump right into travel and they do fine. But you'll hear in my story some of the reasons why we wanted to get some good mentoring, really understand kind of everything we were doing from a patient standpoint, and then just understanding how different facilities run and operate. We wanted to get kind of some of that experience before we jumped into travel. So when we decided that we were ready to travel, we first started by contacting two different travel companies. And we had both of them kind of working for us. Clearly, obviously, they did not know that they were both working for the same people, but we had two companies that were looking for contracts for us. We knew we wanted to start in California. We wanted to go into the West Coast. So that's where we had them looking. One of the questions that I did get was, how do we know about licensing? All of the travel companies will tell you what you need to do for the license to get the license for the state that you want to work in. Now, if they're in the compact, then that works how the compact works. But if it's a state like Florida who does not participate in the compact, your recruiter from the travel company will tell you the steps and the things that you need to do to get your license for that state. So that's what we did what we needed to do to get our licenses for California. Now, there were two of us. This is what made it a little bit harder in our situation. So there were two of us. So it's a little bit harder for a contract company to find a temporary contract for one person, let alone two people. So when you have two people, we knew we only were going to have one car. So they were trying to find places close together or in the same facility. Okay. Now, when you are deciding that you want to travel, you've contacted your recruiters, however many companies you want to get a hold of. You really have two choices. Do you want your location to be your number one, or do you want the setting that you want to work in to be your number one? So you do want to be in a small town? Do you want to be in a major city? Or do you really, really care about the setting that you're in? Do you want to be outpatient? Do you want to do skilled nursing? Do you want to do acute care, rehab, right? So you kind of first got to decide what's more important to you. The location, do I really want to like travel and see things and be in a fun city? Or do I really, really care about the setting? I absolutely don't want to do acute care. So I want to make sure I don't end up in that type of setting. Okay. So you got to start there, figure out the setting you want, right? Chances are you're not going to get both of those. You're not going to get your ideal setting and your ideal location. So that's why I say really weigh your options, figure out the one that is more important to you and go from there. Okay. Because you can be in the absolute setting you want. You can be in the best outpatient clinic you want, but you could be in the middle of nowhere. Or you can be in a really awesome city and be in a really, really crappy setting. Okay. And you'll have both of those stories from me today. So really kind of start there. What's more important to you, location or setting? Then let your recruiter know. And then that's when they can start looking. So they'll look for the setting for you if that's what you want, or they'll look in this area. So we knew we kind of wanted to do Northern California on the West Coast. It's kind of like that San Francisco area. So both companies were looking for placements for us. And like I said, it was really hard to find two open contracts in one area close together. Okay. So once they find locations, once they find a facility that needs travel contract therapist, then they'll set up the interview. Now, it's not the typical interview that you would think of where, the manager of the facility is interviewing you to see if you're going to be a good fit for them. It's actually the opposite. So when it comes to travel, you are actually interviewing the facility. Okay. So, because in most situations, they're not hiring you permanently. They just need you to fill a job for 12 to 13 weeks. So they're not really worried too much about you. They just want to know, can you be a PT? Can you bill? Can you treat the patients that come into our facility, right? So it's more important that you're ready to interview them, the facility, okay? Not the company, not the contract company, but the facility that you'll be working at. So the recruiter will set up the interview for whoever's doing the interview, and you'll get on a phone call. And you need to know the right questions to ask for this, okay? So if you got a piece of paper, you want to go ahead and write down some of these questions. So you'll want to ask, what is the expected productivity? What am I expected to do? Is this a percentage of the day? Is it a number of patients, right? You want to ask that question. That should be the number one question you ask. What is the expected productivity for me? What am I expected to do at this facility as the PT, right? Am I just going to be doing all evals? And research and discharges, or do I get to do some treatments as well? It's a really good question to ask. What types of treatments are you expecting me to do? Is it just, it does depend on the setting, but what things are you expecting me to do as the PT in this facility for 13 weeks? You'll also want to ask how many full-time therapy staff are currently employed by the facility, right? Full-time therapy staff that work for the facility, not other contract PTs. How many other PTs work at this facility, right? So are you going to be the only PT, which tells you you'll probably be doing all of the evals, restarts, and discharges, or are there other PTs that work there? Then you'll also want to ask, what is my schedule going to be? How many hours am I going to get? How many days of the week am I expected to work? Do I have to work weekends? Am I going to be guaranteed 40 hours? What happens if I don't meet my 40 hours? Do I still, those types of questions. If I'm only working there for 30 hours because census happens to be low, do I still get paid the other 10? That can also, you can work on that with your recruiter and when you're doing the contract, okay? But those are some of the top questions that you can ask when you are interviewing the facility that you're going to be working at, okay? So for us, luckily, the travel company was able to find 2 temporary contract positions at the same SNF right outside of Berkeley, California. We were fine with being in a SNF. We both had experience there. Like I said, our priority was the location. So they were able to find 2 positions in the same skilled nursing facility, which was nice because we only had the 1 car. So when we did our interviews, we did ask all those questions. We were told that there were other full-time staff at the facility, but we would be expected to complete, just typical PT evals and treatments for a SNF setting, which you would expect. We were told that the productivity was 95%, which was high for us, but it was okay. We knew it was going to be temporary. And then we would be guaranteed 40 hours per week. So we signed the contract, got in our car, drove, at the time we were in North Carolina, drove from North Carolina all the way to California with our dog. And, full disclosure, this was in 2010. So there may be, this was 13 years ago. So there may be some things that are a little bit different now, but I think generally most of travel has about stayed the same. So it took about 6 days. We drove cross country, ended up in Berkeley. The next thing you have to think about when you're considering travel, so you decided, do you want to be in the setting or do you want to be in location? Once you've got your location, then you got to find your housing. Okay. There are 2 options. At the time, there were 2 options for housing. One was that the travel company would find the housing for us. The other option was that they would give us a stipend and then we could find our own living arrangement. So for us, the obvious choice was the living stipend because it was way more money and we could find a house or housing for cheaper than what that stipend was. So then you get to keep the stipend, whatever's left of that stipend, right? So let's say they give you $2,000 in arbitrary numbers. They give you $2,000 to per month for housing, and you find a house that's $1,000 per month. You get to keep that extra $1,000. Okay. For us, we had our dog. So the problem was finding pet-friendly housing that was temporary and it was cross country. So at the time, before we left, we were looking for housing. So we were in North Carolina trying to find housing and across the country in Berkeley, California, only on the internet. We obviously could not see what we were, you couldn't go look at it because it was across the country. So we wanted a place that did have some walking distance to everything that Berkeley had to offer. Neither of us had been to Berkeley. We've been to San Francisco, but not Berkeley. But we were able to find a 1-bedroom apartment that worked. It was dog friendly. It was a short-term contract, except the walls were paper thin. You could hear literally everything around us. And for those of you that may or may not have been to Berkeley, it was, we didn't feel comfortable walking around at night. We were okay during the day, but walking around at night was not very comfortable for us. But, we're like, whatever, short term, 13 weeks, we can do this. Not a big day, not a big deal. So we walked into our first day. So we pulled in the parking lot, maybe 5-10 spots, not a lot of parking spots, but we found a spot, walked in, found the PT department. We had to wait about 30 minutes for the rehab director arrive. So mind you, we got there when we were told to get there on time, and then we had to wait another 30 minutes for the rehab director to get there. When she got there, she did introduce us to the staff, which had no physical therapists on it. So, and then there were only full-time PTAs at that facility. So we were basically told lies when we did our interview. So when we got there, him and I were the only PTs. And the only full-time staff that were staffed by the facility were PTAs. The OTs and the CODAs were also only temporary contract staff. So that was red flag number 1 for us. So if you're getting information like this, this is actually a red flag, because the question should be, why can you not employ any full-time staff? What's the problem here? Why do you not have any full-time staff? Why are all your staff contract clinicians? Okay. So we spent the rest of the day. We did get some facility orientation. This is our documentation, watch the videos, all those things that you do when you start a job. That was it for orientation. We weren't told anything about, we were told, the documentation and given a tour, but that was about it. When you do travel, there very rarely is any mentoring or guidance. That is one of the reasons that we wanted to get some experience before we started, because we wanted kind of to know how to do things the right way. We didn't want to be literally thrown into a situation with 1 day of orientation to the facility and then being told, go ahead, start treating patients. And that's basically what happened to us at this facility. Another little interesting thing that happened that first day, we were told by the other contract therapists that we were not allowed to park in the parking lot because there weren't enough spots. But if you parked on the street, then your car would most likely get broken into. So that was a great first day. We ended up having to park in like a shopping center, kind of around the corner. It was a quarter-mile walk. And that's where we ended up parking each day. So on day 2, we arrived on time again and then had to wait an hour for the rehab director to arrive. We couldn't do anything until she got there because she was the one that created the schedule for all the therapists. So because we hadn't been there yet, we hadn't worked with any patients, we didn't know who needed to be seen. So we had to wait an hour, right? Then she gave us our schedules and told us that we would, because we were the only PTs, we would be doing all of the wound care at the facility. So this for us was red flag number 2. We were never told that we had to do wound care. That's why I say these are the types of questions that you need to ask on your interview. So we were a little taken aback by that. Neither of us felt comfortable. We didn't feel like we knew enough about wound care to provide an effective job for these patients. So we told the rehab director about it, that we weren't comfortable doing it. She said, okay. So let's fast forward through that first week. Same kind of thing happened every day. We couldn't start treating until we got our schedules because we didn't know who to treat. So we had to wait for her. She was often late. We did treat our patients. I was able to get a patient who had been there for quite a while. He was not very old, maybe 50s, but had been there for a while, had not walked in about 5 years. I was able to connect with him. And I was able to get him to walk in the parallel bars for the first time in 5 years. So it was a very, it was just amazing to be able to connect with him in a way that he trusted me to then be able to see him walk. My husband, on the other hand, this was also at the time of RUG levels. Payment has changed now for skilled nursing, but if anybody has worked in skilled nursing when there were RUG levels, it was everybody in that facility got a high level, the ultra high level. So everybody was getting the max amount of therapy, regardless of their abilities. So my husband ended up with a patient. He had to spend 90 minutes with this patient who literally did 100 push-ups every day and walked himself independently across the street to get dialysis at the hospital. But so this patient was obviously very independent, functioned at a very high level, but my husband had to spend 90 minutes with him. So a lot of unethical, illegal stuff was happening at this facility, which made us uncomfortable. And we were constantly asked why we were not meeting the 95% productivity, because I will tell you, he was not spending 90 minutes with that patient because it wasn't right. The patient didn't need it. It wasn't ethical. We were doing what we knew to be appropriate and safe and legal and ethical for all of the patients that we saw. And because of that, and then on top of having to wait for the rehab director to give us our schedule every morning, we were not meeting the 95% productivity. Okay, so very unnerving, but we had signed the contract, so we were going to stick with it. You know, it's 13 weeks. We're going to do what we know how to do right, and then we'll get the heck out of here. Monday of week 2, went to work, saw our patients, finished the day. As we walked to the car, my husband got a phone call from the recruiter of our travel company and informed us that the facility had canceled our contract. So I was beyond thankful that we did not have to go back into that facility and do any of those things again. My husband was freaking out because he was like, oh my God, we just drove across country. We don't have jobs. How are we going to get paid? What are we going to do? Okay. So right away, that company worked, starting to find us 2 more contracts. And we just told them to look at any major city in California. So again, we didn't really care about the setting, but we knew there were some other major cities in California. So we had them working. We contacted the other company that we had been working with as well originally. So we had both of them again, looking for 2 more contracts in California. So basically it took about 3 weeks. So we got to enjoy all of Berkeley and San Francisco, a lot of hiking while the 2 companies searched for jobs for us. And 3 weeks later, they came through again. So again, if you guys have any questions while I'm talking, feel free to drop them. So Our travel experience didn't quite start off well. At the time, I'd never known or heard of any contracts being canceled by the facility, but apparently it's a thing and it happened to us. But what we survived, right? So they found us 2 positions in North LA County, right? So again, it was hard. The reason it took 3 weeks, because again, it was 2 of us. We only had 1 car, so we needed to be close. And again, it's hard to find 2 positions in the same facility. So they found us 2 separate contracts at 2 different facilities, but they were only about 5 minutes apart from us. Okay. We had our interviews, we learned better questions to ask this time, decided they were a good fit, and we signed the contracts. My husband ended up being placed in a very small community hospital, and he was going to be doing outpatient and acute care. And I got placed in an outpatient early intervention pediatric setting. So I had not, when I started PT school, my goal, my dream was to do pediatric PT. I had a clinical in it. It was a terrible experience. A story for a different time. But basically, after that experience, I was like, I'm not doing peds. It's not for me. Right. But because I had that clinical experience, it was enough for this company to want me to be there as a contract therapist. Okay. So the moral of that story is any experience that you have can help you get a placement as a travel PT. So in a desperate time, they said, you know what, your resume shows that you did a peds clinical. Would you be interested in it? I said, yep, let's do it. Okay. So they found us these jobs and they were in North LA County. It's called Palmdale, California. You may or may not have heard of it. So we were excited. We had jobs. So, and then because we were in Berkeley, we're still living in Berkeley, we were able to drive this time and look at housing. So we did that. We spent a weekend, drove down there, trying to find a place to live. Found out very quickly, and we were given a lot of advice that you don't really want to live in North LA County. So we were able to find a 1-bedroom apartment in Valencia, California, which is about 45 minutes south, which was also much closer to LA. So we loved our apartment in Valencia. There was a lot of walk. We could literally walk everywhere: grocery store, movies, mall, another like walking park. There was a dog park, restaurants. We could just walk everywhere. It was wonderful. We're also 1 mile from Six Flags Magic Mountain. So we kind of went there every weekend. Okay. So it was a good time. We did have to drive 45 minutes to work every morning, but our experience living in Valencia made up for that 45-minute drive. So my husband, he started in that acute care hospital, and then they floated him to outpatient. It didn't take him very long to figure out the facility that he was much better in outpatient. He knew what he was doing, got his stuff done. He did it well. So very quickly, the facility decided that they were just going to keep him in outpatient, working 40 hours a week, which he loved anyway. It was your normal kind of outpatient mill, seeing 3 to 4 patients at a time, which is not his jam. But again, it's a travel assignment. It's 13 weeks. We can do it. He did what he needed to do, did it ethically, and was able to still provide good treatments for the patients, but he was tired every week. For me, so I found out during my phone interview that the pediatric clinic had not had a PT in 3 years. They had only had an OT, and they were ready to start kind of offering PT again, but it was a very interesting setting. It wasn't just an outpatient gym, but it was kind of housed within a daycare. So there was already OT, there was speech therapy, and then they were adding me to be the PT. The other cool thing about it is that it was like half outpatient and then half home health. All of it was early intervention. Some of the outpatient was kids a little bit older than 3, but most of it was 0 to 3 years old. So I think the best part of that whole experience was that there was no caseload for me for 3 weeks. It had to be built up because they hadn't had one there. So for 3 weeks, they let me just observe and learn from the OT. And in that entire time, I was getting paid a traveler's hourly rate to sit there and watch. It was for 3 weeks, it was the best job ever. And then it's just slowly my caseload increased. So it was a while before I had a full, probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks before I actually had a full caseload. But I was still getting paid 40 hours. So completely different experience from that first one. Okay. Like I said, there was outpatient early intervention and it was home health early intervention. I preferred the outpatient, but I didn't mind the home health either. Facility also had another smaller location that actually ended up being only 1 mile from our apartment in Valencia. So eventually they had me working there on Fridays, which was nice. My husband could take the car and I could just walk to work. So for this situation, both of us enjoyed the location and the contract so much that we actually ended up extending our contract and doing another 13 weeks. So we did a total of 26 weeks in North LA County. So just know that if you really do like the contract and the facility still needs you as a contract PT, you can extend your contract, okay? So for that facility, or for that, I guess that assignment, because we were in LA, we got to do all the LA things, which is what we wanted to get out of travel. We wanted the higher salary and we wanted to be able to see things. So that's what we did. I think one of the interesting parts about that, I guess one other interesting thing for me about the pediatric clinic was they asked, when my second contract was kind of coming to a close, the facility asked me to interview the next contract PT that was coming in to take over the caseload. So by the end of 26 weeks, I was able to build an entire caseload, which I was super proud of for not having done peds before. But then they were also asking me to do interviews. So I'd never done an interview before. It was really weird for me. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, but looking back, I think it actually set me up to be the rehab director. It gave me some experience in my future role. So, while I haven't done peds since then, it did give me a lot of experience. So it's kind of one of those things. Again, you know, it's a short-term contract. It's 13 weeks. It may not be your desire, it may not be your favorite thing, but you can always learn something from there. And I was able to learn things that I now use. I teach about it. I did things, I learned treatments that I use with other people. So that is also the other nice thing about contract companies or let me say travel contracts, is that it's short-term, but you're still going to learn something. Okay. So like I said, we extended that one. Well, the end of the 26 weeks came up and we decided the next place we wanted to be was Vegas. So we had the two companies looking for us. Again, still hard trying to find two contracts in the same area. So what they did, they ended up finding us two, there were two skilled nursing facilities in Vegas that they were owned by the same company. So they were but they were on different ends of Vegas, which we did not realize. From one end of Vegas to the other could take you about 30 minutes because of traffic and all that stuff. So initially it sounded great. Two contracts for the same company, but two different facilities. So again, because Vegas is only about 3 hours from where we were living, we were able to spend a weekend, find a place to live, found a pretty nice apartment, for a fully furnished apartment in Vegas that was kind of central to both of those locations. Not used to talking this much. So we found the apartment, got the contracts all set up. Again, we knew what questions to ask in the interview, what would happen each day, because we only had the one car. My husband would take me to work, drop me off, and then he would drive to work, and then he would come pick me up at the end of the day. So for me, I had experience in skilled nursing. Again, the really good experiences, but when I had my full-time job, and then the terrible experience for the first contract. So for this one, I walked in. I was the only PT. I didn't know that going in, but there were full-time staff at the facility, just no PTs. One piece of advice I will also give you is to understand the laws for each state that you're working in, because they are different from one state to another when it comes to PT and PTAs. So I knew, because you had to take a law exam for Nevada when you get your license. So I knew that you could only have, I think it was 4 PTAs per PT. So I could only be signing for 4 PTs underneath me. Okay. So what was happening, because I was the only PT and they had quite a few PTAs, they were starting to ask me to sign more than 4. And I had to say, no, that's not legal in this state. There was a PRN PT that would work weekends, so they had her kind of sign the other ones to cover them. But what was happening, because I was the only PT, it was a 200 bed facility. So basically I was doing 10 evals every day. Basically what was happening, it was either an eval or a re-eval every day. Again, I didn't mind that. I knew what I was getting into. I knew it was a short term. I can do evals, it's fine. But what was happening is, because the documentation was so extensive there, I was not meeting the productivity. I think it was 95 again. But the nice thing about this situation, this facility, is that the current rehab director was new and she understood that I was the only PT and that without me, they wouldn't have any therapy. So she often said, I don't care if you're not meeting the productivity, I just need you to do the evals. I was doing as fast as I could, doing the best job I could, but she was very supportive, and I don't care how long it takes you. We have nothing if you're not doing the evals. So she was like, just do what you can. And I would get 8 to 10 evals every day, which also meant that I was working about 10 hours a day. But the nice thing in the contract, so I was getting my 40 hours and then I was getting overtime at a contract rate. So I was making some pretty good money. My husband, his situation was a little bit better at the skilled nursing. Not as bad as that first one. It was kind of your typical skilled nursing. Everybody was in that ultra high level, but they were more appropriate for it, and they would listen to his concerns if he had any. So what ended up happening with this contract is, so we had signed a 13-week contract. Before we signed it, my husband kind of on a whim applied for a job that he did not think he would get. He was thinking about moving into education and teaching in PT programs. Job opened up in the Tampa area. He applied for it, did not think he would get it, and he got it. So after 3 weeks, we ended up having to leave. So in this situation, we canceled the contract. I was getting a lot of, so like I said, the rehab director was really supportive of me, but every week the regional director would come in for that company, and she would often make comments, and then the rehab director would back me up and she'd be like, it doesn't matter. We don't have her. We don't have evals. She's doing what she's doing. We're going to support her. So it was really nice. I actually built a little bit of a relationship with her. And about a week after we left, she texted me and said that she was leaving. So, there were issues within that company, in that facility, again, not nearly as bad as that first one, but when you have a supportive director, it makes all the difference in the contract. So that actually was the end of our contract. So we only did 3 weeks in Vegas and then ended up moving back here to Tampa. And that was the end of our travel. We had it planned to do it for much longer, but because he got that full-time job, that was the end of it. So I hope these stories have kind of helped you just maybe understand a little bit about what you could expect. I hope you've learned some questions to ask if you decide to go into travel and you get an interview. I hope you know the questions to ask. I hope my stories kind of help you figure out how to ask those questions and what kind of things to look for. Yeah, so it can be a lot of fun and you can see a lot of things and you can experience a lot of things, but it can also be a little bit unnerving. You have to really, like I said, you have to know the laws in the state. You have to know what's legal and what's ethical in the setting that you're working in. I didn't share, but in that first skilled nursing facility, when that year, so like literally the day that we started there was a new rule about concurrent therapy. They had made it that it was not, you could no longer do concurrent therapy in skilled nursing, but they were doing it and they were not caring about it. And I was often saying, you can't do this anymore. They got rid of that. Well, we don't care. This is how we have to treat our patients so we can meet our productivity. There was another one of the codas there. I remember this very clearly. She said she spent about 30 minutes going back and forth to a patient's room trying to find the patient, and he just was never in his room. And I remember her coming back and saying, I don't care, I'm billing 30 minutes because of my time. Like, you can't do that. You did not do any therapy. You never saw the patient. You can't. And so things like that were happening at that first facility. And so we had no problem stepping up and saying, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. Okay. So if you're thrown into a situation like that, remember, it's your license. You're replaceable. The facility doesn't care about you. Your license is not replaceable. So you need to know the laws, know the rules, and protect yourself and your license if you're thrown into a situation like that. You can leave a contract if you want, right? Or they can cancel it. Both of those happen to us, or you can love it and you can extend that contract, okay? So I hope you learned something. Feel free to drop in the comments any questions you have, anything that may have come up for you. Any like aha moment, like, oh, wow, I didn't know about that, or that, thank you for sharing that. Please share that. Anybody else that may be coming through may see that and think, oh, wow, I didn't know that either. So again, like I said, drop your comments, questions. I will definitely come back and answer them. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Have a good Thursday.